Uh, if this little adventure started about, oh gosh, like almost like 3-4 years ago, Roy approached me and said, I know you've written family histories before. Would you think about writing ours? I said, oh, Roy, I don't know. These are a lot of work. I had done 2 before, and they always take more time than you think, and it gets really complicated with family members, and they want to sort of revamp their history. And I said, let me think about it. So I was talking to Patrick Henderson, God rest his soul, of Whitney Benefits, and he said, Sam, you got to write this book. You just got to do it, man. So go back to Pat, and go back to Roy, pitch him a poem, and you got to do this book. So you can thank Patrick Henderson, because I said, okay. Then talked to Roy, came on, agreed some, and we were off and running.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Sure. Okay. Is that better? Yeah. All right. Throughout history, for a long time in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, 19th century, historians mostly subscribe to the great man theory of history, that events were not made, history was made by men or famous women, Cleopatra, Cyrus the Great, Genghis Khan, etc. And that theory lasted a long time, and then during the 19th century, people kind of questioned that theory and said, look, there are so many complicated events that happen during a conquest or how a country is formed. It all can't be ascribed to one person. And I said, okay, so the great man theory sort of fell aside, and yet I can't totally back away from it. And I think, Thomas Jefferson, the people that wrote the Constitution of this country, may not have made history, but they influenced history. They put their signature, their imprimatur on history. And when this really came home to me was when I read Michael Shiraz's masterpiece, The Killer Angels, about the Battle of Gettysburg. How many books have been written about Gettysburg? Hundreds. What made his different? What made it so compelling that when I finished the book, I went right back and started on page 1? Because he read all of Lee and Longstreet's journals. He read their letters. He read what their family did, and it made it so personal. But what they had to go through to fighting that battle. And so I'm still a subscriber that certain individuals influence history. And there were members of the Garber family that influenced history. J.O. Willits influenced history in Sheridan County. There's just no doubt about it. His perseverance and his foresight. And as a sort of historian, I'm trained as a journalist, not as a historian, but I've written and read an awful lot of history. And man, what he did, the trip that he made out west, and then got on that horse and rode 400 miles from Cheyenne up to Hardin and back, and kept those incredible letters. I don't know how many documents, thousands, tens of thousands of documents I've looked at. I've never seen any documents that were so compelling as those documents, those letters that J.O. Willits wrote to his wife, assuring her that he was fine, and his observations on the West. He had such a keen eye, and it was such a privilege to be able to look at documents like that. And the other great advantage to writing this is the Garbers are pack rats. Man, as a historian, what you really crave are primary documents. You don't want hearsay, you don't want a newspaper article, but you want a primary document. And man, the Garbers just had them by the score, letters, transcripts. It was a gold mine. And also, I did make a trip down to the American Heritage Center. I wanted to see what was going on when J.O. had his sheep business and his draft horse business, and started going through those documents of what was going on in that era, 1880, 1890. also just, it was just a treasure trove. I had to say, no, Sam, don't go down that route. No, 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 don't go down that rabbit hole. Don't pay attention, come on, let's follow the ball, let's do what the Garbers, what's J.O. doing, you know. But there were so many primary documents, but I'm very grateful to the Garber family for the primary documents they supplied to this. The other thing I loved about the Garber family, well, just a step back, Phil Roberts, the professor emeritus of Wyoming history at the university, tried for a number of times he said, Sam, why don't you write Francis Warren's biography? And you know, he said at the American Heritage Center is the repository for all his papers and letters and stuff. I said, I don't know, Phil. I said, Phil, why don't you write it? Phil said, because I don't like him. And I'm not sure that I would really like F.E. Warren, and that's a big project. I mean, that's a 5-6 year project to write like that. And the beauty of writing this project was I really got to like the Garber family. I mean, I just became, all the different members, the extended members, what they did, how they survived. You know, it was really such a pleasure to read about them. So back to J.O., and he sort of set the template, as it will. J.O. entertained a low opinion of alcohol, foul language, and debt. You look at many of his purchases he made, he did it in cash. He saved money and bought land the old way, so he didn't get saddled with that debt. And when the economy went sideways, and baby, in 1893, did it ever go sideways? He didn't have to worry about payments, or have very few of them, because he paid for things in cash. The other thing that J.O. and his ancestors did, they were adapters. And that really impressed me. That was so, well, I think impressed is really kind of it's a belittling word. I was just amazed at how they adapted. They would see things happen that they would say, okay, we're gonna have to set this aside, we're gonna have to do something different. And of course, the greatest example is when J.O. came, he wanted to raise cattle, but then he saw Martin Fruin and all these guys around the Powder River Basin running tens of thousands of cattle, and he knew he could not compete with them. He didn't have the land, he didn't have the capital. So he kept a small herd and raised draft horses and sheep, and did really well for himself. You know, and as the years passed, and say 1900 to 1919 was really good years for Wyoming agriculture, good years for the Garber family, and then 1919 came along, 1920, which was probably the most deflationary year in Wyoming and U.S. economic history. And they just buckled down and survived. They did what they had to do. They didn't abandon agriculture. They just, you know, they vibed, and they had the boys, and how they adapted. They raised different crops. You know, in another book I was working on, just finished The Spirit of 1889, I went and lived with a family in the James River Valley in South Dakota for a week. And they were 4th generation farmers. And they said, we're the only 4th generation farmer in this county. Everybody else has given up. And the Garbers are 5th generation farmers at the end. And that was so remarkable to watch. That it was like a hereditary trait of adaptability. And it was heartwarming, but it was also encouraging to see that. The other thing that I found so intriguing about the Garber family is their dedication to education. I mean, from the get-go, every generation was really devoted to education. Of course, I think Vi lived to help others become more educated. But you go back generations that they had started college back in Illinois, and it was really heartwarming to see that was part of what community was education, and that was very heartwarming to see and encouraging. It was also difficult's not the right word. It just was to watch before the advent of modern medicine, what families had to go through, and deaths. You know, people would die, and then they just would buckle down. And I just loved how J.O. and Hattie adopted these kids when their parents, it wasn't going to work when their mom died. They just said, okay, they're gone or they're not available, we'll take over. There was no question that they took over the responsibility of raising these kids. And one time, when I was an undergraduate, I met a guy, an evolutionary biologist who specialized in statistics and longevity. And he said, in the 17th, 18th, and early 19th century, early 20th century, if you lived till you were 35 or 40, you were probably going to live till you're 80. Because your immune system was a wonder. You know, you had survived. And I look at J.O., who died at 80. And how old was Vi when she died? Yeah. Good genetics, and I think they must have had just really remarkable immune systems.
Uncle Vic, my Uncle Vic lived to be 101 and a half.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's just amazing. And probably the last thing I want to say is that history to me is a form of stories. And my God, the stories of the Garber family, the stories of their airplanes. You know, some I didn't put in the book, you know, but it's just amazing that they're still alive. Right? It's just remarkable, you know, what they do with planes. And you know, also they take planes up in the mountains looking for strays, flying down to see their place outside Lake DeSmet. And you know, it was just the stories, and that is combined with the accessibility the Garber family gave me. I mean, I could say, can I come talk to you? Would you have time to talk to me? Yes, 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 come on over. Yes, let's talk about this. And Vic, I mean, your family's stories up in Montana were just, I mean, they're remarkable. They're nothing short of remarkable. So as a historian, it was just like, boy, this is just like in heaven. And now we have all these primary documents and people to talk to me, and I like these people I'm interviewing, impressive history. I like what they've done for a community. And finally, when Roy asked me to do this project, I said, Roy, by golly, I gotta have one person in your family who's gonna be the point person. And I said, okay. And that person was Pat. And Pat did the most amazing job. I mean, I can't tell you, having been down in the weeds in other projects like this and not having people answer, no response. Well, that's not what she said. No, he really meant this. No, you should need to write it this way. To have Pat, like I'd write Pat an email in the morning and I'd have an answer by that afternoon. And it was just, what a privilege. I mean, to work with a person. So Pat, again, I know I've thanked you in public, but by golly, I can tell you, it was such a privilege to work with you, so thank you. And I'll just end with the fact that winding through this book is the story of the stone house. And I've often believed that architecture tells stories that no other entity can. And how the Garber Willits family, how they moved in and out of that house in the generations and fixed it up and put additions there and tore things down there. And J.O.'s incredible innovations, bringing water to that house when I think very few houses had indoor plumbing. But that was very satisfying to see what they've done and not let that house go, or sometimes it just has to be sold to someone else. I mean, that's just the way it happens. But that it was kept in the family. And it's, in a lot of ways, it is really indicative of the Garber's adaptability. And it was such a privilege. And I've been in that house many times, and it was wonderful. So in closing, thank you to the Garber family. It was a wonderful project. And thank you for having me come give a talk.
clips anywhere close, it goes,
That's,
does it go inside or outside?
it goes outside. You're
Yeah.
good. Okay, just turn
Can
it
you
up.
hear me, Lee? All right, very good. We're on.
Okay, we're on.
Here, Sam.
Oh, thank you.
Well, Sam, thank you for your kind words. It's been a long project, and I would make a few comments to add to Sam's. Number one thing we have to do as a family, this book never would have happened without two people. It started over 10 years ago, and that was Victor and Jane. And Vic, if you know Vic very well, he can be a little insistent, and he kept saying, we gotta do this, we have to do this, and yeah, we'll do it. And of course, it never got started, but they did start it, and they did, then hired Sue Castaneda, who was a historical researcher down in Cheyenne, and she started the book, and the pieces started together, and then I think the family started to say, you know what, maybe there is a story here, maybe we could do this. And so we progressed, we got together, and as Sam said, then you start finding the pictures, and then we find the letters, and then we, of course, we have the original letters, but we find more correspondence. And one of the things that starts to happen is you have to decide, well, what goes in the book and what doesn't. Where do you start and where do you stop? Because we did have a lot of material. And then unfortunately, as the process was going along, Sue had some hardships in her life and lost her husband, and she ended up moving to the Lake of the Ozarks, and so we all of a sudden were without an author. And we hawed around a little, and I suggested that we go to Sam Western. I had been impressed with Sam's work. I had worked with Sam. He wrote the books for Mr. Whitney's foundation, and so I had been part of that. And I liked the way Sam researched and put history, as he talked about it, how he put the things around us that affect us that aren't personal, how they affected all of our lives. And so I went to Sam, and the story was exactly as he said. He was pretty insistent on one person, which finishing up the book I totally understand. Then the second good part of all this was Sister Pat had just retired, and she very graciously took it on. The book never would have started without Vic and Jane. It never would have been finished without Pat. And for that, we really do appreciate it. She did a great job and put together. But there was a lot of other family members involved. There was basically 14 of the family worked through most of the book. And like I said, there was a tremendous amount of material. And Pat also, besides dealing with Sam, was very good in going back to the family members. This is a large family, and not everybody agrees on everything that's happened or is being done. And she had a very nice way of being kindly persistent. And eventually we had information from all of the family members, and we kept moving forward. One of the things you find when you write a book and you work on it like this, you read it so many times that you miss the obvious mistakes. And so we had a couple of things. Number one, Sam did, part of his deal was a proofreader, and so that helped. But we had an in-family proofreader that was pretty phenomenal, and on details, which you always want your book to be accurate. But it's difficult when you cover this many years, because birth dates and death dates and important dates that are listed somewhere maybe in the family tree, when they get back in the text, they're not the same. And so I'd like to thank Bernie. Bernie was one of the best proofreaders we had. She did a tremendous job. So we all worked through the book, and as it came to the end, and Tony, I'd like to thank you. You, towards the end, brought information we didn't have from your family and brought it towards us. And we kept going, and we would get closer, and how we're gonna be ready to go to the publisher next week, and then next week became 2 weeks. But we did put it off long enough that the newest member of the family, who's here today, he's in the book. So his birth dates are in there. We got those in, so that was good. One of the things that you also have to do as a family, you have the book, and how are you going to get it published? And so as obviously working with Sam, well, you know, you can go look for a publisher, but if you find one that's willing to publish your book, they're going to edit it and change it, and it's not going to be as you present it. So we made the choice of self-publishing the book. And that's fine, but there's a couple of things. Number one, when you do that in a small quantity, the books are expensive. But we didn't figure ordering a few thousand of these was a good bet. I don't know that it'll ever be on the bestsellers list at the New York Times. And so when you go to publish it, it is expensive, and that's when two other members of our family stepped up very generously. And that's when Bruce Garber and Susie Garber Johnson stepped up and paid for the publishing of the first 125 books. And because of the size of the family, most all of those books were given to family members. And also through the process, we have to give a big thank you to Mona Brown and Judy Slack, because they helped us immensely with everything from editing to pictures, and were very helpful. And that was one of the reasons when we came down towards the end, we said, you know, obviously we were never going to recoup the money we had in it. That wasn't the reason we wrote the book, but we were very happy to have them, and they have been very gracious about setting up the mechanism. So, as has been mentioned, when you buy a book, the small amount of profit goes back to the Bighorn City Historical Society, and we're very happy to do that. So it's been a big project. It was over 10 years, right, Vic, Jane, from start to finish, but we are very pleased with it. It is a historical record of the family and quite up to date, and part of doing this was to make that record. We've done it, and we'll pass it on to the next generations to someday update it. I'd like to just add a little bit about what Sam said about the book, and one of the, of course, main characters in the book are the Willits family, and it was their trip here that started. The title of the book, as you've seen, is The Far View, and as a family, when we started the book, I don't know, I think we had 15 or 20 ideas for the title, and then you're supposed to have a subtitle, and you work back and forth, and it was one of those things that kept getting putting on the back burner because nobody was really sure that we liked the title, or the suggestions. And when the book was kind of turned over to Sam, one day I asked him, I said, Sam, you know, we don't have a title for the book, and he looked at me kind of with surprise, and he said, well, it's a far view. Far view comes from back to the Willits family, because where we live was, where Nancy and I live was where they started. That was the homestead. And it was named the Far View Ranch because of the view, which is on the cover of the book. It was a beautiful view from the ranch. But as Sam kind of explained, it was really a history from the Willitses up. They always had a far view. They kept looking out, and I think we, as Sam has indicated, kind of had to do the same thing for us to survive. All of us did. All of our neighbors did. Production agriculture in Wyoming is not easy. It's tough, and Mother Nature doesn't help. But if it's what you do and it's what you love, that's how you carry on. Part of that ability, I think, to carry on comes back to the relatives, and I presume some of it's probably genetic. Part of it also is from the example set. And as Sam indicated, if you read the book, there was a lot of tough times. And they just had to keep going. And in thinking about today, I thought about the one story in the book that to me had a lot. And if you knew our grandmother, Vi, she was tough. And she was pretty tough on her family. She expected everybody to work hard and get things done right. And she was the same way. And as Sam indicated, she did dedicate her life to education, and she helped people in our community and all the communities that she lived in. She spent time in Montana with the Garber family there and taught in Montana. But that was her life. It was to give. She was one of the most unmaterialistic people that I think you'll ever cross. I think in her passing, I think the only jewelry in existence were their wedding rings. She gave to people, and she gave in many ways. And the story that I'm reminded of, there was, to start with, Roy Garber and Vi Willits met because of Roy Garber's sister, who was, Lina Garber was teaching at the Lone Star School, which was located up on the flat west of where the Brenton Memorial is. Roy Garber was working over at the Beckton Stock Farm, so on the weekends he would come over to see his sister, and his fate would have it, he crossed paths with Vi Willits. And so Lina worked as a teacher, and she also, I think, spent her life with the Wood family. She lived with them, I think, while she taught. And one summer, the Wood family decided that they were going to go to Yellowstone National Park and on down and see the Tetons. And so Lina went with them and to take care of the kids and as part of the adventure. And they got down to Moran, Wyoming, and were camped there. And a man came by the campground by the name of Noble Gregory and struck up a conversation, and part of the conversation was that, gee, they needed a school teacher. And, well, Lina was a school teacher. She didn't come home with the family. She stayed. And not only did she stay and teach school, but it became a relationship, and she and Noble Gregory were married, and they started a family in Moran. Started the family, and she was, the children were growing up, but she became ill, and one summer, it was obviously there was something wrong. A doctor came through the area visiting the park, and Noble found out he was there and had him come and check on his wife, and he was pretty sure that it was cancer, and there was not much that could be done for it. So she wrote home to her brother and her sister-in-law and said, I want to come back to Bighorn. So arrangements were made, and they went to get her. Now you have to remember, there's no highway, there's no interstate, there's barely a 2-track road. And I always had to laugh at this story a little bit, because I swear part of this is genetic with the Garber family. You never go anywhere that you start on time. You always start too late in the day. And so this is no different. Now, the other part was Roy Garber couldn't go, so his brother goes. Eugene goes with him. And they get in the Model T and they head north, and they get started too late in the day, and there really is no road. I mean, they are literally following tracks up through Parkwood and down the Rosebud, and nightfall catches them down a little north of the Rosebud, and they basically can't find the road, and they're lost, and they're opening gates on what road they think's right there, so they have to stop for the night. Grandma curls up in the back seat, and Uncle Gene sleeps under the car in his horsehide coat, and when daylight breaks, they look out, and all's well, because they look across the Little Horn Valley, and there's the Custer Battlefield Monument. So they know where they're at, so they proceed on towards Billings, and when they get there, they call into the park, and the Yellowstone Park at that time has only one-way traffic. You can't go both ways on the road, so they ask for permission to travel the wrong way, so they can get to Moran quicker, and they are given permission to do that. And they arrive in Moran towards the evening, and Grandma is disappointed, and her disappointment comes through in some of the recordings. She's never seen Lina's children, and she wanted to meet them, but they've already been sent with Mr. Gregory's sister. They've been sent to Meeker, Colorado, to live with her. So as the evening progresses, Grandma goes out, and she and Lina watch the sunset behind the Tetons. And Grandma tells a story. It's pretty emotional, but she held it together. She was tough. She was proud of the fact that she held her emotions. But Lina never saw her children again, and never saw the sunset behind the Tetons again. And it was the last night she spent in their home. So the next morning they loaded up, they came back to Bighorn, and then they did go to Mayo Clinic, and the diagnosis was confirmed that it was cancer and there was nothing to be done. So they brought her back to Bighorn, and in the process built a room on their little cabin for Lina. And Noble Gregory did come later that fall and spent part of the fall and part of the winter with them as Lina slowly passed away. And of course, the day the painkiller drugs weren't available, she went blind later on in the winter and had hallucinations, and it was a long, tough battle. But they took care of her. And when she passed away, they arranged the funeral and made sure, and she's interned in Mount Hope Cemetery for Bighorn. Those things went on all the time. Grandma, as you know when you read the book, was remarkable that she went to the University of Wyoming and had 2 degrees, but she had to stop her master's degree for a while, for at least a year or more, and come home because her sister, who had had 3 children, after the 3rd child contracted Bright's disease, which today is totally curable, but ended up being fatal. And as Sam talked, all of a sudden, Grandma Willits, at the age of 55, became a mom to 3 very young children, one of them being an infant. And so they raised them in the house where we live to adulthood. So it was part of that story. She was tough, but there was empathy, and there was always seemed that somebody else needed help. But I guess it is life, and it's how it's done, and maybe that's how we've all survived. You just kind of buckle down when you have to and keep after it. So we did, we have, and it's been a good go. Grandma, as she got older, never quit helping or young people or working. And if you read the book, she was a fabulous gardener. And it was part of surviving in those days. All people had, you had to have a garden to survive. And she was quite good at it. She came to live with us in our home when she was in her late 70s and early 80s. And so Mom and Dad built a room on the house for her. And in the process, Mom got a lot bigger dining room when she needed, and the 3 boys, we got a nice big room in the basement. And Grandma had 3 requests when she came to live with us. She wanted an asparagus bed, she wanted a raspberry bed, and she wanted a strawberry bed. And so Dad obliged, and he hauled in topsoil, and he made each. And so we grew up through my late junior high years in high school with Grandma being the gardener, and then Mom also had a garden. But I remember that asparagus bed would yield 2 quarts to a gallon of asparagus a day in the summer. The strawberry bed was about a gallon to 5 quarts of strawberries a day, as was the raspberry bed. And we always had a milk cow. And at the time that this time also, then my mother's mom, Amy, came to live with us because her grandfather had passed away, and she sold her little farm down in the Panhandle, Nebraska, and moved home. And she had a mobile home in the yard. Grandma was a baker. So we had one grandmother that was a gardener and one that was a baker. And she was a bread maker and a cake maker. And we had fresh food and we had cream. And we lived a pretty darn good life as kids. Somebody once said, well, were you poor? And I said, no, we never had a lot of cash like most people at that point didn't have cash, but we sure were poor. We had a good life, and we still do. So thank you for today. I hope you find the book interesting. We've had a lot of fun. It's been good bringing family together and in and out and putting the story together. There could probably be another 400 pages to the book of things, good, bad, and indifferent, but I think it's a good highlight of the book and a good chronology of the family, and so it's been fun. So thank you very much.
There's one thing I'd like to say right quick. One of the things this book accomplished. You know, there were 3 brothers. There was my father, Orr, he was the oldest, Vic was the second oldest, and Gene was the youngest. When Gene graduated from the University of Wyoming, he came back home here, and they discovered that, 3 of them couldn't make a living on the place. So Gene went to Montana and carved out a beautiful ranch, and that's where he grew up, and the kids grew up and retired. The other thing is that I wanted to mention, my dad and Vic were in partnership, and partnerships aren't always a big love affair, They didn't always see eye to eye on things. And an example of this is we had a party line at that time, and there was 2 foremans up here, the Blaney brothers. One of them was a foreman on one ranch and one on the other ranch. And one night, Ralph called up Dan and he said, Dan, we're going to the movie tonight. Would you like to go with us? And he said, no, I think I'll stay home and listen to Orr and Vic fight on the telephone. So, the one thing this book has done, you know, our family, Dad being the oldest, we were a little older than these guys. So we grew up listening to conversations like that. We never got like the Hatfields and McCoys, but, you know, everybody got along, and nobody really talked much about any differences we had. The one thing this book has done is brought our two families a lot closer together, and I thank you, Pat, for that. And we all put our shoulder to the wheel and worked together. It came out great, so thank you.
I forgot to show you the title of the book and everything. So this is the far view. This was taken by Nancy, and this is from their yard towards the mountains. So that's the far view.
Yep.
And I'm going to have Roy introduce the Garber family. If you folks could come up so he can introduce you, I'd like to have a picture of you all.
Okay.
Were there any questions?
Well, yeah, I'd love to have a question. Anybody have a question? Probably can't answer, but I'll try. Mary Ellen.
I don't have a question, but I have a brief story I want to tell on Roy. I don't think he's heard it, but he might have.
Here, you better come up here and use this if you're going to tell stories.
Well, okay, I'll try here. If I don't fall on the nose.
Sam, is this safe to let Mary Ellen tell stories?
No, it's not.
Well, about 30 or 40 or I don't know how many years ago, I did an interview with Victor Garber in the Wyoming room on tape. And it was 90 minutes, I remember, and it was mostly on the history of ranching in Sheridan County. And anyway, Vic says about halfway through it, he says, is that thing still running? And I said, well, yeah. He says, turn it off. So then he started telling me all these stories that he didn't want me to tape. One of them was on his young son, Roy. And he says, you know, all my kids I saved money for, and they got it when they graduated from high school. And they used it to get help with their education, except Roy. Roy sold his and bought a car. He said he didn't care about education, and Vic was really disappointed that Roy didn't care about education. So, I want to tell you right now, I just looked up this morning to see about this, because Roy, if you don't know, is president of one of the largest educational foundations in the state of Wyoming. I think it was the first, wasn't it, Sam? The first one in the state of Wyoming. I think he's the longest serving member of the board. 33 years, did you know that?
Well, no, but I probably close.
You're the oldest, aren't you?
I think so now.
Yeah. So, people should know that. He's done a wonderful job. I was on the board for a few years, so I saw him in person. He's done a beautiful job, and I think he needs to be congratulated. 33 years with the Whitney benefits.
Thank you. And yes, in spite of Dad's, I also served 13 years on school district #1 school board. So education is still there. It is important.
Clay Moore and Guy Moore.
Janelle Garber Moore.
Old, what's his name, Pat's husband, Tom.
And Pat.
And Richard Garber and my daughter Susie.
Paul Garber.
Nancy Garber.
And Tony Garber and my wife Julie.
Jane Garber and Vic Garber.
Bertie Garber.
We have your name.
Oh, they know me. Mary Ellen Big Shoulder. Judy, anything else?
That is all. Thank you very much. Round of applause for them, please, everyone. Thank you.